Hello everyone, welcome, and in today's video will be about my journey and experience in Warhammer 40k, how it started, and how it's going. So in the beginning, and I'm not going to get too deep into it, I was properly exposed to Warhammer through Bricky's video explaining every Warhammer 40k faction that there was. At the time, it was the only video that was out there, and I had already been watching Bricky's videos, been watching his game reviews, and I decided why not watch this, and there was my slow descent into the rabbit hole that is Warhammer lore, not just 40k, but also Warhammer Fantasy to a lesser extent. And from there, I began watching some lore videos by Luton, among other, and some other creators. I also have been looking at more 40k memes, not necessarily understanding the full context for some of them, but gradually over time, my interest once again was increasing. I then began to start playing Vermintide 2 and Darktide roughly around 2 to 3 years ago. Very much enjoyable, and even still at that point, wasn't too knowledgeable about like what the Inquisition was, other than it's the big scary space Gestapo effectively. And with Vermintide, other than understanding that it was set during the end times of Warhammer Fantasy, I didn't know what that truly meant. I also didn't know that at the time, if I'm not mistaken, Age of Sigmar was effectively what became of Warhammer Fantasy and everything that entailed. And it wasn't until roughly around a year ago where I started considering actually learning how to play Warhammer 40k proper, learning how to play 10th edition. Now, starting with Space Marines. The main reason why, I started collecting Space Marines around last December. My friend Brody, who I mentioned in yesterday's video, gifted me a box of Horus Heresy Mark III Tactical Marines, mainly because I had said that I really like the look of how the old Horus Heresy models, I like their aesthetic a lot more, like generally speaking, a lot more, the more dirty, grimy look. And so he got me a box that had 20 of those guys. I assembled them, painted them, and overall found myself really enjoying the hobbying aspect of 40k before even getting into the game aspect of it. I already was interested and intrigued in the lore, and especially pertaining to Space Marines, whether it be in the Horus Heresy or in 40k. Now, a main reason why I decided to play Space Marines and to use them as a starting point was due to, from my understanding, Space Marines seemed like a good balanced starting point to get into 40k, to learn generally how the shooting, fight phase, charge phase, movement and command phase interactions could work out. Now, on top of that, there was also the addition of some of my favorite models, regardless of what army we're talking about, were Space Marine models, whether they be from the Horus Heresy, like the Mark III and Mark VI Tactical Marines, or Stern Guard veterans, Blade Guard veterans, the Land Raider tank, Redemptor dreadnoughts, or just dreadnoughts in general. And so that was why I wanted to start with Space Marines. It was a lot of it just, I felt like it was a good starting point. I'd heard it was a generally good starting point. Why not jump into it from there? Now, ultimately, why did I stop playing Space Marines? Well, in my experience, from when I was learning the game, and the first roughly 5 to 7 games of 40k for me, I'd come to the feeling of Space Marines were disappointing in the shoot and fight phase. Now, it also is dependent on what units and like data sheets we're talking about for Space Marines, and also what you're having them fight into. I do acknowledge that, and as I've gotten more experience, I'm aware of that. But at the time when I was playing Space Marines, they just felt very middling, and it felt like a disconnect from how they're typically portrayed in expanded media, whether it be through animations, novels, or what little I know from the novels. And it came at odds to me. And once again, I think that this could also primarily be due to the fact that I was playing against Necrons in my beginner games. The Necron army I was fighting was very punishing, and that could be a huge contributor to my displeasure and discontentment with Space Marines. I also feel as though Space Marines, as a faction with their army, are too reliant on Oath of Moment. Now, that sounds funny to say because, yes, Oath of Moment is their army rule. Of course, they should be relying on it. The problem I have with Oath is, at least as a newer player, was feeling pressured to put an Oath of Moment on a proper target, but not really knowing what may be a proper target to Oath. And on top of that, from my experience, when I would Oath certain units or models, it hardly ever felt like putting an Oath on them made a difference. On top of the fact that some of my favorite units, like because their models look freaking dope, whether it be Stern Guards, Terminators, or a handful of other select units, felt like they themselves, because of their data sheet, need Oath of Moment. And so if you're not running Rabute Gilliman in an Ultramarines army, it is kind of rough to only have one Oath to work with. So if you happen to get rid of a unit of Immortals that was the Oath of Moment target, but they have an Overlord attached to them, well, that Overlord doesn't get the Oath of Moment transferred onto him, although he was once part of the bodyguard unit, technically, that had the Oath on it. Thirdly, there's just too many data sheets for Space Marines. It's something that a lot of other creators in the 40k space have beaten over the head with, have very much exclaimed about, but there are way too many data sheets for Space Marines, and that was also a big reason what caused me to stop playing them. Was there were too many options to consider. There were too many models that I didn't know if this was this clicked, or this could work out. And to this point, with data sheets, the detachments for Space Marines, and once again, I feel like I need to say this as well. I'm speaking about Codex compliant Space Marines. I'm not referring to Dark Angels, Blood Angels, Space Wolves, Black Templars. Those four are excluded from this conversation. But for me, the detachments just didn't click. The detachment I've had the most experience playing, because it was the one that just, to me, came across as the simplest to learn and most, in quotes, beginner friendly, was Gladius Task Force. And even that detachment just wasn't clicking for me. On top of, it never felt like I could get a list built together, regardless if it was meta or if it was just, hey, I like these units and I want to throw them together. And things didn't seem to work well. Now, why did I slip into Chaos? Why did I choose Chaos Space Marines? Well, namely for the aesthetic, and also some of that also pertains to lore. I'm more of a fan of the older classic Firstborn gear, whether that be the classic plasma gun, the classic Mark 6, 7, and 8 power armor, the old box dreadnoughts, although Chaos Space Marines don't utilize them because they have to have Hellbrutes. So there is that. Additionally, their lore, stories, and characters, in my opinion, from what little I know from the Horus Heresy and a handful of other novels set post Heresy, are more interesting. They're more varied, they're more unique. Sure, you can be reductive and say that certain traitor primarchs or legions or warbands are, they're just murder-loving crazies in the case of like the World Eaters. And it's like, yeah, you can be reductive about that, and that's not untrue. However, there's a bit more nuance to it with characters like Karn the Betrayer, or hell, even looking at Erebus, and everyone hates Erebus. I also feel as though the memes for Chaos Space Marines are on the whole better. Not to say that Space Marine memes are bad, but Chaos Space Marine memes just seem to tickle that my funny bone, at least. but most importantly for tabletop, for the playing of Chaos Space Marines, and why I ultimately chose them, was the fact that their army rule of dark packs and most of their, or more than half of their detachments, just clicked for me. They just made sense. I looked at them and I already understood the basics of, okay, I know generally speaking how I can apply Dark Pact as an army rule. Or, oh, Creations of Bile does this. This is actually pretty straightforward. Okay, cool. Or Renegade Raiders, same thing. And to that end, Chaos Space Marine datasheets, for me, were very easy to identify how best to use them because, unlike Space Marines, there aren't 100+ datasheets, and a solid 10 of them are dedicated to purely melee or purely shooting, but they want to shoot different targets, and things just felt like they clicked more. They made more sense. I could very clearly figure out how and where I want to use Chosen or Legionnaires or Chaos Spawn, whatever have you. And by the time I chose Chaos Space Marines, by the time I kind of settled on them, I had already started figuring out that I liked a more melee oriented army than shooting, because getting shot off the board didn't feel fun for me, and so why would I want to make the game unfun for someone else, regardless if I'm playing in Tabletop Simulator or I'm playing in a physical tabletop with actual miniatures. Now, will I ever go back to Space Marines? Yeah, probably. Like, most definitely. And if I do, it's less of if, and when I do, it's either going to be a Blood Angels army or a Black Templar army. More likely a Blood Angels army. I've already toyed around with the idea of how I can run it, and a lot of it just comes down to just the straightforwardness of Blood Angels, especially with Liberator Assault Group as a detachment. And to that end, I've learned a lot on how to better deploy my units, how to better position them effectively, especially for a more melee and aggressive army like Chaos Space Marines. So I feel as though, because I've been able to learn more since my last outing of Space Marines, I feel as though when I come back to them, whenever that is, it's going to be a better time. And I hope it's a better time, because I personally don't want to give up on Space Marines. I want to use them. And on top of that, and why I'm so gung-ho on, yeah, it's probably going to be Blood Angels, they're probably by far my favorite Space Marine chapter, with the second being the Black Templars. But with that, thank everyone for watching and listening. Feel free to comment down below your thoughts on Space Marines and Chaos Space Marines, or heck, any other factions. Maybe you also started with Space Marines and found, I just don't like their shooting, or I don't like their stat line, or I don't like their lore, and you ended up going to Orcs or Guardsmen. Tell me down in the comment section below. Also, feel free to let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more content like this in the future. Consider liking the video. You don't have to consider subscribing. That is completely up to you, though it is completely free. But until the next time, guys, I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I hope you guys have a great time on the tabletop. Until next time.